the psalmist prays, Lord, let me know my end and the number of my days. Tell me how short my life will be. I know you've made my days a mere span long, and my whole life is nothing in your sight. A human being, however he stands on earth, is but a puff of wind, his life but a passing shadow. The riches he piles up are no more than vapor, and there's no knowing who will enjoy them. Now, Lord, what do I wait for? My hope is in you. There's a bedtime prayer for you. But who on earth would pray it? Oh God, stick it in my face that I'm just a puff of wind, a passing shadow. I doubt if it'll make the curriculum in the self-esteem classes at Sears School. Why on earth would he pray such a strange prayer? Asked to be confronted with that rather self-evident but disagreeable reality that our life is not forever. Perhaps because reality though it is, his natural tendency was to avoid it. Human beings have never confronted the brevity of life easily, with acceptance and equanimity. How to come to terms with, be truly comfortable with our own mortality. Have you figured it out? The fragility, the transience of life is not something that they embraced 3,000 years ago any more than we do today. We all prefer rather to slide through our days, to immerse ourselves in labor and play, party, and maybe even our kind of prayers without dwelling on the fact that life is gradually slipping like sand through our fingers. And if there ever was a culture designed to ensure avoidance of that reality, surely ours is. Calendars full, parties scheduled, life busy up to here. There really is a rock singer named Def Lemon Meringue. He bolts out his blues in a deep voice laced with a slight Irish brogue. His real name is Paul Duffy. He's 47 years of age, but he doesn't sing about the troubles back in Dublin or the rain that won't stop falling or even some woman who done him wrong. He sings about life in the New World. His latest is called The Overcommitted Blues. My calendar's full, my daytimer's frayed, my voicemail's overloaded, I'm way underpaid, got tons overdue, several deadlines to meet. The only things working are my 2 front feet. I'm fumbling, got those overcommitted blues. If you see me at the water cooler, please don't stop and schmooze. I've got those overcommitted blues. I doubt if it'll be a classic. But it's rather true to the life of a lot of us, replete with action and distraction, with pressures and appointments to the point where we have little or no time for reflection upon the nature and meaning of our days here. And that's why I worry a bit about us. It's so much easier to avoid this dimension of life in our time. Children, young people are so sheltered that they feel immortal. I encounter many in their 30s or 40s who've never had to deal with this reality. I see this avoidance and denial in our worship of youth, our struggle to look permanently healthy and robust, our seeming inability to move gracefully through the ages and stages of life. One senses our discomfort with this reality in these ubiquitous jokes about how you know when you are growing old. Middle age is when your classmates are so gray and wrinkled and bald that they don't recognize you. Have you changed from stud to dud? Does the morning after last all day? Is caution the only thing you exercise? Well, on and on, you know them. Now, if there were nothing to be gained in facing this disagreeable reality, then we might, well, fill up our days and keep up the pace and go at it. But the whole point of these ancient words is the insistence that, well, that autumn out there has it right when it parades before us the glory, but also the inevitability of dying, the reality that all things come to an end. For one thing, in the face of our brevity, we can come to a little more clarity about what life is. Remember old Sam Johnson in the 18th century commented, "The knowledge that you're going to be hanged in the morning greatly concentrates your mind." Clarity about what? What can we concentrate on and what we can let slide? That's what. When we come up against the brevity and the frailty of our days, there can be a whole shift in our sense of what is really important. I rarely sit with a grieving family struggling with the sudden loss of a loved one, but what someone will sooner or later say something like this: "Well, it certainly does make some things less urgent." The psalmist reflects, "The riches he piles up are no more than vapor, and there's no knowing who will enjoy them." Modern translation: "He has given wits and labor, energy and long years to amass millions so that his kids will be happy and secure. How can he know what they will finally do with all that money or who will end up with it?" A young friend wrote to me from her junior year abroad some time ago, "Living over here is a great experience because it really puts things in perspective. I've been sent a bunch of your sermons, and a lot of what you've been working on is coinciding with what I'm thinking. I don't know why, but lately I've realized that I'm not going to live forever. It's just not going to happen. Death is something that too few people confront, I think. I've got to watch who I spill my thoughts to, because many will conclude that I'm a morbid person. But I believe that one cannot possibly start living until they face death, and that death will someday be theirs. And I don't think it's morbid at all. In fact, I think it's good, because then everything is put into perspective. I think it's unreal how we tend to be ruled by trivial things, but once we realize and confront the fact that life won't be ours forever, then and only then can these aspects of life that deserve our time and care really be concentrated on. You wrote, Gil, that something that is ours forever is never precious. But isn't it true how precious things are all too often appreciated when they are gone? And what are the precious things? I think we know. They involve certainly the personal above the impersonal. They're more likely to be moments of resting rather than running, of listening and loving rather than manipulating and managing. Isn't it odd the difficulty we have, though, carving out time for one another? I have at least 100 emails I should respond to, and there'll probably be another 100 tomorrow. I got a telephone call this week from a college debate partner and friend that I've not seen in 50 years. Typical modern story, I guess. He went off to California, and I stayed here in the Midwest, and we sort of lost touch, as they say. I was in his wedding back then. And he and his wife just celebrated their 50th, and so he looked me up on Google. If you don't know what Google is, ask your 12-year-old. Good to hear, old friend. Sorry it's been so long. We've all experienced it. In a death notice or phone call, we're unavoidably faced with a swift passage of the years. Where has the time gone, we say. But things take on a whole new clarity then, don't they? We sense what truly counts and what does not. A woman who's been told that she well may be terminal started to eat a popsicle the other day, and her daughter said, "Mother, you shouldn't eat that, it has sugar in it." And she burst out laughing. Fundamental wisdom. Some things are more important than other things. A monstrous thing, wrote Blaise Pascal, to see people raging or despairing over mere affronts and inconveniences while being indifferent to things of grave import. A fellow named Atwater had a near-death experience. He says, "The possibility of dying has such an interesting way of blotting out non-essentials. You begin to deal with situations like, who said I have to hold my fork that way? Why can't I just walk up to her and start talking what really matters? Why can't I converse with a vacuum cleaner? I want to run, skip, jump rope, and climb a fence. I want to catch snowflakes with my tongue and make footprints where none have ever been. What do you mean I'm 47 and people my age don't do that sort of thing? You mean I have to go through proper channels?" One Sunday morning, Stephen Covey He's the guy who wrote this 7 effective something or others for effective, well. Stephen Covey got on a subway in New York City. There were a number of other passengers on the car, but they were either quietly reading or thinking to themselves, or they were all sleeping. At the next stop, a father and 3 small children got on the train. The father sat down beside Covey. The children began screaming, tearing up and down the aisle of the car, even grabbing at newspapers held by some of the passengers. And Covey observed this for a few minutes, growing more and more irritated and angry, and finally he turned to the father and said, "Sir, don't you see your children are creating a disturbance in this car? Why don't you do something about them?" Father turned to him and said, "You know, I probably should. Their mother died about an hour ago and we're returning home from the hospital. Children don't know how to handle it, and I'll confess I really don't know what to say to them." Covey says he swallowed hard and began to talk to the father about his wife and what he could do to help. In a complex and oft-confusing world, when life's details get in the way of living and mounting worries crowd out simple beauties, snow and silence, fresh water and flowers, when tragedy strikes without warning and suffering arrives unannounced, then most of us cling to that which we know is beautiful: children, love, laughter, dreams, wisdom, wonder. All that friendship means, rearranging priorities and taking time to discover what is alien and what is truly mine. Sense of clarity. And then I think with it, and because of it, sense of dependency. Now, Lord, what do I wait for? My hope is in you. With the recognition of the fleeting and fragility of life, puff of wind, passing shadow, we're pushed, sometimes resisting, toward the only reality in which we can finally trust, in whom we can finally trust. The tragedy of our bustling and busyness is that we do not take the time to nurture an interior world where we are at home with God, where the fears of our frailty are quieted a bit in the sense of His company with us on our way. Marvelous little piece by a fellow named Noah Ben Shea. He writes, "All of us are magicians. With great skill, we shift who we are as if we were peas under a walnut shell, and soon we ourselves have no idea where we are hidden. Soon pride in our camouflage causes us to become caught in our own sleight of hand." "Well," said the young man, "at least I'm not like my old grandfather. He sits with his chin resting on his cane, doing nothing for hours. I have my whole life in front of me." "You do have your life in front of you," said Jacob, "and yet life is an experience not only of breadth, but of depth. As you grow older, the game of life goes inside, makes room for memory and faith, hopefully. This interior life is no less important, and in some ways more so, because it's more yours." "But," said the young man, "what do you think my grandfather spent so much time thinking about?" "Maybe he's thinking about you," said Jacob. "About me?" "Yes," said Jacob. "Maybe he's worried that his grandson is living only on the surface of life, and he wonders when you will come inside." It's only when we let slip in the realization of how little and limited we are apart from God that He becomes a place to go and rest and grow. It's as we learn to face our life as it is, so brief and fleeting, and trust it into the hands of the one who gave it and to whom it belongs, that I think we can turn back to our days then and live them with more intensity and focus and sense of purpose, even to the point of exhilaration. The Greeks had a word for it. The Greeks have a word for everything. They have at least 2 words for our one word, time: chronos and kairos. And chronos is ordinary time passing, chronology, slipping by quite inevitably and often without our noticing. Kairos is time experienced as precious and present, time heightened in its awareness and intensity and significance. Chronos is 100 Rules to a Perfect Wedding. Do you know the book, mothers? Kairos is the sound of the organ, fanfare, and the appearance of daughter in white moving down the aisle. Chronos is clock time, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, creeping on in its petty pace. Kairos is bell time, ringing at New Year's Eve at midnight with the whole world on tiptoe. Chronos is 9 months of nausea, back pain, and waiting. Kairos is the telephone, and it's a boy, it's a girl, or maybe it's triplets, that's Kairos. Chronos is one more Sunday afternoon Bears game. Kairos is the Bears in the Super Bowl. Well, we'll live most of our hours in Chronos, I'm afraid, but we must stay open to Kairos. That is, we must stay available to God's time when life does take on flavor and intensity and joy and eternity, and some people never make it there. Barry Bailey asked his mother how her friend Irene was doing. Son, she said, she's been trying to die for years. Every time I see her or hear from her, she will say, I'm so glad to see you, Marguerite. I probably won't see you tomorrow because things are mighty bad. I don't know I'll be here. And then Bailey's mother said, if that woman had ever worked as hard to live as she works to die, it's amazing what a life she would have had. Well, on this All Saints' Day, I'd like to pay a small tribute to a woman who died this year, a woman who lived all her life intensely, loving, giving to the full, a joy to millions, a joy to us. Hildegard Knef died in Berlin at the age of 73 this year, a remarkable singer, actress, author, who lived more lives than most of us will and wrote of them in 2 wonderful volumes I've read and reread. A childhood in Nazi Germany, living through the destruction of Berlin under the Allied bombing, imprisoned for years in Russian camps. For most of us, her life never knew a permanent home. Her life was one of suffering and disappointment. Her parents really pretty well abandoned her emotionally. They said she was no beauty like her sisters. She suffered polio, rheumatic fever, ruptured appendix, broken bones, 50 surgical operations. She did have a grandfather who believed in her, kept telling her that she had a very interesting face. She starred on the stage in Berlin and Broadway after the war. She made it to Hollywood for several movies, became a close friend of many, Kurt Weill, Cole Porter. Yet most of all, she sang her way into the hearts of people on 2 continents. We still listen to her. Ella Fitzgerald, another friend, called her the singer of the century, although without a voice. Her secret? In a letter to her daughter Christina some years ago, she writes, one of the most absurd things about human beings is that they refuse to accept the brevity of life. And brief it is, whether you live to 100 or not. So Christina, try to avoid idols in your life. They're interchangeable and they lead to a wantonness of life that is easily mistaken for love. There is a Christian alternative. I have noticed that those who refuse to serve in life often wind up as slaves who never know what real life is all about. I know the service that God calls us to, Christina, is not easily and readily recognized. But I've come to believe that the only possible reason for our being here these brief days is to serve one another in some way or another until our breath runs out. Just a puff of wind, but oh, how it can blow a lot of good for a time. Amen.